A 911 call, a black teenager and a mother arriving just in time. What happens when the truth cuts deeper than the accusation itself? The fading sunlight cast long shadows over Brookstone Estates, an upscale neighborhood in Columbus, Ohio. This was a place defined by its perfectly edged lawns, meticulously sealed driveways, and sidewalks so flawlessly maintained that even a single crack was almost unthinkable. The neighborhood was eerily quiet, its stillness broken only by the occasional bark of a dog or the low rumble of a luxury car gliding along the street. On this particular late afternoon, 16-year-old Marcus Jordan adjusted the strap on his gym bag as he made his way through the quiet streets. Music poured into his ears from his headphones, drowning out the everyday sounds of the world around him. He had just wrapped up an intense basketball practice at Central High, a session so grueling that every muscle in his body ached, and after a long day of classes and drills, he was thoroughly exhausted. Normally, Marcus would have taken the bus home, but on this day he decided to cut through Brookstone. Although he was familiar with the neighborhood, having spent time there because his best friend lived only a few blocks away, he also knew that this was not a place where people typically expected to see someone like him, a black teenager, walking alone. In one of the pristine homes, its large bay window reflecting the last rays of the sun, lived Evelyn Carter. Evelyn had called Brookstone Estates her home for the past 15 years. She knew every face that appeared on her street, every car that parked along the curb, and every routine that defined the daily life of her neighbors. On that day, something about the scene before her unsettled her deeply. There, in front of her window, was a teenage boy, tall, black with an athletic build, and walking alone with a gym bag slung casually over his shoulder. At first, Evelyn felt only a slight twinge of concern, but as moments ticked by, that concern morphed into a nagging suspicion. Was it really just a case of an unfamiliar visitor, or was there something more sinister at play? Her hand hesitated over her phone as she weighed her thoughts. Perhaps the boy was simply passing through. Maybe he had a legitimate reason for being in Brookstone. Yet, doubt crept in swiftly and relentlessly. What if he were up to no good? What if, by not doing anything, she would later hear on the news about a break-in just a few houses down the street? The thought sent a pit of anxiety deep into her stomach. Better safe than sorry, she reasoned. With a deep, steadying breath, she dialed 911. "Yes, I'd like to report a suspicious person in my neighborhood," Evelyn said, her voice betraying a hint of apprehension. Unbeknownst to her, Marcus was not just any teenager, and the unfolding story was about to reveal layers she could not have imagined. As Evelyn kept her eyes fixed on Marcus, she clutched her phone a little too tightly, watching as he moved along the sidewalk. "He's walking down my street, looking around as if he's scoping out houses. I don't know who he is, and he's carrying a bag," she explained to the calm voice on the other end of the line. The dispatcher, undisturbed by the urgency in her tone, asked politely, "Can you describe him for me?" Evelyn's lips tightened as she replied, "He's tall, black, wearing a hoodie and gym shorts. He has a bag, I think. I don't know, but something about him doesn't look right." When the dispatcher inquired if the young man was engaged in any illegal activity, Evelyn hesitated before replying, "Well, not exactly, but I've never seen him before in this quiet neighborhood." Convinced that her concern was valid, the dispatcher assured her that officers would be sent out to investigate immediately. Even as Evelyn ended the call, she continued to watch Marcus, who had just paused briefly to change the song on his playlist. Unaware of the drama unfolding behind him, Marcus had no inkling of what was about to happen. Meanwhile, a few streets away, Officers Franklin and Ramirez were riding in their squad car when the 911 call came in. The message was brief but clear. Possible prowler, Brookstone Estates, male, black, mid-teens, carrying a bag. Officer Franklin, a stocky officer with 15 years of service under his belt, exchanged a look with the younger Officer Ramirez, who was still gaining experience on the force. "Let's check it out," Franklin said, and with that they flipped on their flashing lights and sped toward the neighborhood. Marcus was only 2 blocks from his home when he first heard the piercing wail of a police siren behind him. Confused, he turned around just in time to see the squad car pull up rapidly. In a flash, the car doors swung open and 2 officers stepped out, their hands hovering near their holsters. "Hey, stop right there!" one of the officers demanded. Frozen in place, Marcus slowly removed his headphones. "What's in the bag?" Officer Franklin asked sternly. Marcus blinked, startled, and stammered, It's my basketball gear. I'm just on my way home." His voice remained steady, but his heart pounded and his chest tightened. He knew instinctively that this was no random stop. Officer Ramirez stepped forward, his tone measured as he asked, "Do you live here?" Marcus, gathering his courage, nodded and replied, "Yes, sir. I live just a few blocks over." Officer Franklin scoffed at the response. "That's right. What's your address?" he demanded. Before Marcus could answer, Officer Ramirez reached out and took hold of his bag. "Hey, that's my stuff. Relax," Franklin muttered as he unzipped the bag and rifled through its contents. A pair of worn sneakers, a sweaty jersey, a water bottle. Nothing that seemed out of place. Yet Franklin was not satisfied. "Then why did someone call the cops on you for cutting through this neighborhood?" he pressed further. Marcus's heart pounded even faster. "It's just a shortcut," he managed to say. "I'm not doing anything wrong." Officer Ramirez, looking uncertainly at Franklin, seemed to entertain the possibility that Marcus might be telling the truth. However, Franklin was not convinced. As Marcus opened his mouth to offer further explanation, his words caught in his throat. Over the shoulder of one of the officers, he noticed a sleek black SUV rolling slowly toward them. The vehicle pulled up with a sudden stop, and the doors swung open sharply. Out stepped Rebecca Monroe, the mayor of Columbus. Neither the officers nor Marcus had any inkling as to who this imposing figure might be, but the atmosphere immediately shifted the moment she emerged. Rebecca Monroe was not merely a mother rushing to pick up her son, she was the mayor, and she carried herself with an undeniable authority. Dressed in a sharply tailored navy blazer and polished heels that clicked authoritatively on the pavement, she moved with a calm determination. It was as if she had walked into countless boardrooms and city halls where people had doubted her authority, and she was here to remind everyone exactly who she was. Her eyes locked onto the two officers standing over her son, and at that moment, Officer Franklin's posture stiffened noticeably. He recognized her from news broadcasts and city meetings, but it took him a brief second to fully register the gravity of the situation. Officer Ramirez was the first to break the tense silence. "Ma'am, I need you to step back. We're handling this situation," he said politely yet firmly. Rebecca did not flinch. Instead, her voice, smooth yet cutting like a finely honed blade, replied, "Oh, I see. And what exactly is the situation?" At that moment, a wave of relief washed over Marcus, who could only exhale the soft "mum" as if acknowledging the shield that had just been raised around him. Officer Franklin cleared his throat, attempting to justify their actions. "We received a call about a suspicious person in the area," he explained, his tone defensive. Rebecca raised a single eyebrow, her expression skeptical. Officer Ramirez then gestured toward Marcus. "We stopped him to ask a few questions, to confirm if he actually lives here," he added. In response, Rebecca took a slow, measured breath and then produced her phone from her purse. With deliberate taps, she brought up Marcus's student ID on the screen, displaying not only his picture but also their address and a photograph of the two of them at a recent community event just last month. For a long, heavy moment, silence reigned. Officer Ramirez shifted uncomfortably, and Officer Franklin's jaw tightened as the implications of the evidence sank in. Rebecca was far from finished. "So, tell me," she said steadily, "did you stop him because he appeared suspicious, or because someone assumed he did not belong here?" Neither officer offered a clear answer. Behind them, in a doorway shadowed by the remnants of her former certainty, Evelyn stood frozen, her eyes wide as she watched the entire confrontation unfold. The realization struck her with crushing force. She had called the police on the mayor's son, a child simply walking home from practice. Now she was left to watch as a mother, one of the most powerful figures in the city, stared down two officers who were rendered speechless by the unfolding events. Rebecca stepped slowly forward, her gaze fixed intently on the officers. The air around them grew heavy, as if every onlooker were holding their breath, waiting to see what she would do next. She did not yell or curse. Instead, her voice was steady and precise as she continued. "You searched his bag. You questioned where he lived. You assumed he did not belong." Officer Franklin squared his shoulders and replied, We were just following procedure. Rebecca tilted her head slightly, her eyes never leaving his, and then addressed Officer Ramirez. Procedure? We got a call about a suspicious person, a teenage boy walking home? And you decided that was reason enough. Officer Ramirez shifted his stance uncomfortably, caught between his duty and the undeniable injustice of the moment. Marcus, still standing awkwardly at the center of the confrontation, rubbed his hands together nervously. The sting of being treated as a suspect in his own neighborhood was painfully clear in his eyes. At that moment, Rebecca turned her full attention to Evelyn, who remained rooted in her doorway. Was it you? Rebecca asked softly but firmly. Evelyn opened her mouth to speak, only to be silenced by the overwhelming weight of her actions. The truth was undeniable now. She had made a mistake. The sheer magnitude of the error, the realization that she had called the police on an innocent child, and worse, the mayor's own son, crushed her internally. She had believed she was simply being cautious, but the consequences were far graver than she had ever imagined. Evelyn's face flushed with a deep, burning red as she swallowed hard. I just thought, she stammered, trying to rationalize her actions. I thought, but no words could justify the fear that had clouded her judgment. Rebecca's gaze was unyielding as she continued. Do you know what could have happened here? Marcus could have been tackled, arrested, or even slammed against a squad car for resisting, or worse. All because a woman who has lived in this neighborhood for 15 years decided that the sight of a black teenager with a gym bag was reason enough to dial 911. Evelyn's stomach twisted painfully as she realized the magnitude of her error. She had believed herself to be protecting her community, yet in her actions she had contributed to a cycle of fear and injustice. For a long moment no one spoke. Officer Franklin, still visibly uncomfortable, finally broke the silence. If there's no issue here, we'll be on our way, he said quietly, almost as if apologizing for what had transpired. Rebecca exhaled sharply, her disappointment palpable as she replied, That's it? Officer Ramirez hesitated before adding, We were just responding to a call. But, Rebecca shook her head, her expression one of profound disapproval. Yeah, you were, she stated simply, before turning back to Marcus. Placing a gentle hand on his shoulder, she said, Come on, baby, let's go home. Marcus slung his gym bag over his shoulder and followed his mother to the waiting SUV. The officers exchanged murmurs as they returned to their squad car, their words laden with unspoken regret and confusion. Meanwhile, Evelyn remained in her doorway, her arms wrapped tightly around herself as she watched the car drive away, a visual echo of a moment that would haunt her for a long time. For Marcus, for Rebecca, for every black family forced to explain their very existence in spaces where they belonged by rights. This was not over. The ride home was shrouded in silence, heavy with unspoken questions and lingering pain. Inside the SUV, Marcus sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window as the world passed by in a blur of shifting shadows and muted lights. He replayed the events in his mind, the flashing lights of the police car, the intrusive search of his bag, and the way the officer's eyes had treated him not as a person but as a suspect. Every detail was etched into his memory with painful clarity. His mother, Rebecca, gripped the steering wheel a little tighter, her thoughts echoing the inevitability of such moments. I always knew this day might come, she thought silently, although she had never imagined it would happen so soon. After several minutes of tense silence, Rebecca finally spoke, her voice soft yet resolute. You okay, Marcus? She asked gently. He exhaled slowly, his gaze still fixed on the darkening street. I don't know, he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. She nodded in quiet affirmation, and he added, What would have happened if you hadn't been there? Rebecca's stomach clenched at the question, for she wished she could offer an answer that would erase the injustice of what had just occurred. Instead, she reached over and squeezed his hand reassuringly. You did everything right, Marcus, she said firmly, and you must never forget that. Marcus sighed deeply, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He was a 16-year-old kid, still sweaty from basketball practice, and yet he carried the burden of an experience that no one his age should ever have to endure. Rebecca looked at him, really looked at him, as if trying to imprint this moment into her heart. It wasn't just about today, it was about every single story like this, every child who was made to feel like a threat before they could be seen as a person, and every parent forced to teach their child how to navigate a world steeped in prejudice. Across the neighborhood, Evelyn sat alone in her living room, the same phone trembling in her hand, the phone that had set these events in motion. She replayed the call over and over in her mind, the words mingling with a sense of deep regret. She had thought she was protecting her neighborhood, but in truth, she had let fear cloud her judgment. Now, she was forced to confront the possibility that the danger might not have been the boy at all. What if, in her actions, she had endangered someone else? The thought was unbearable, and it left her questioning everything she had ever believed about safety and community. In that quiet, contemplative moment, Evelyn began to see the world differently. No longer could she justify her actions by saying she was simply being cautious. Instead, she realized that she had been driven by a fear that was as misplaced as it was dangerous. The question now echoed in her mind. What if the danger wasn't him, but was in the prejudice that clouded her vision? This new understanding gnawed at her, urging her to reconsider every call she might ever make again. As the evening deepened into twilight, the repercussions of that fateful afternoon rippled outwards. Neighbors whispered in hushed tones about what had occurred on the quiet streets of Brookstone Estates. Some spoke of the injustice meted out to a young boy who had done nothing wrong, while others debated whether Evelyn's actions had been entirely justified. Yet one fact remained undeniable. This was not just a story about one afternoon in one affluent neighborhood. It was a microcosm of a much larger, pervasive reality, a reality in which assumptions and biases often carried a weight far heavier than the truth itself. Rebecca, the mayor, knew that her intervention that day was only a temporary reprieve from a system that had long failed black families. Every step she took as she guided Marcus home, every word of reassurance whispered in the quiet of their car, was a silent declaration that change was needed. It was a reminder that in a world where appearances too often dictated one's fate, a single act of courage could challenge the very foundations of prejudice. Marcus, still processing the events, clung to his mother's words. He understood even at his young age that his experience was emblematic of a larger struggle, a struggle that would continue until society recognized that every person deserved to be seen first as an individual, not as a stereotype. And while the ride home was marked by a heavy silence, it also carried within it the seeds of resilience. For every time someone like Evelyn dialed 911 out of misplaced fear, there was a mother like Rebecca stepping forward to defend the right of a child to exist in the world without judgment. In the days and weeks that followed, the incident sparked conversations throughout Columbus. Community meetings were held, social media discussions erupted, and local newspapers carried stories that questioned the very nature of safety, trust, and identity. In these discussions, the story of Marcus Jordan became a symbol, a powerful reminder of how quickly suspicion could morph into a life-altering confrontation, and of the profound impact that a single moment could have on the fabric of a community. For Evelyn, the repercussions were personal and painful. The memory of that afternoon haunted her, a constant reminder of the day she let fear overshadow reason. Late at night, as she sat alone in the quiet of her home, she would replay every moment, wondering how different things might have been if she had simply taken a moment to truly see the young man passing by her window. The realization that she had contributed, even unwittingly, to a system that targeted people solely based on their appearance was a burden that she carried silently, day after day. In contrast, Rebecca continued to stand as a beacon of resolve. Her role as mayor came with many responsibilities, but that day, more than any other, she was simply a mother protecting her child. The incident solidified her commitment to challenging the systems that allowed such misunderstandings to fester. In interviews with local media, she spoke of the need for a deeper understanding, a need to look beyond first impressions and to confront the prejudices that had long divided their community. And so, as the seasons changed and life in Brookstone Estates returned to its meticulously maintained routine, the memory of that afternoon lingered in the minds of those who had witnessed it. It was a story that would be retold in hushed tones at neighborhood gatherings, a cautionary tale of how a single 911 call could have ramifications far beyond what anyone could have imagined. For Marcus, for Rebecca, and even for Evelyn, the day served as a powerful reminder that in the quest for safety and belonging, the truth must always be allowed to shine through the layers of assumption and fear. Ultimately, this is a story about human frailty and resilience, a story of how even in the face of deeply ingrained prejudice there is hope for change. It is a narrative that challenges us to confront our own assumptions and to question the societal structures that continue to perpetuate injustice. It is also a reminder that every call made in fear carries with it the potential to alter lives, for better or for worse. And so, as you reflect on these events, consider this: how many times have assumptions led to consequences that no one truly intended? How often has a call for help, born of fear, transformed into a moment of reckoning, a moment when the truth, however painful, proved to be mightier than the accusation? In the end, the story of Marcus Jordan is not merely about one afternoon in an affluent Columbus neighborhood. It is about every black family who has ever felt the sting of suspicion, every young person who has been forced to navigate a world that too quickly judges based on appearance, and every parent who has had to fight tooth and nail for their child's right to be seen as a human being first. It is a call to all of us, a call to open our eyes, to question our biases, and to act with compassion and justice in our hearts. As you walk through your own neighborhood, think of Marcus, Rebecca, and even Evelyn, whose story reminds us that sometimes the difference between safety and injustice can hinge on a single moment, a single call that carries the power to change lives forever. Share this story, talk about it, learn from it, because the next time someone like Evelyn picks up the phone, the outcome may not be as fortunate as it was for Marcus. And so, in the quiet aftermath of that fateful day, a seed was planted, a seed of awareness, of empathy, and of the understanding that we must all do more to ensure that our actions do not perpetuate a cycle of fear and prejudice. The truth, as painful as it may be, is that every call, every suspicion, every moment of doubt holds within it the potential for transformation. Let this be the day we choose to see one another as people first, to break free from the constraints of assumption, and to build a future where every individual is given the dignity and respect they deserve. This is not just a recounting of events, it is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. A story that challenges each of us to be better, to listen more deeply, and to act with the awareness that our choices echo far beyond the moment. For in the end, every 911 call, every confrontation, every moment of fear carries with it a lesson that, if learned, can lead us toward a more just and compassionate society. Let this story serve as both a warning and a beacon of hope, a warning that unchecked fear and prejudice can lead to irreparable harm, and a beacon that reminds us that, even in the darkest moments, there are those among us who will rise to defend the truth and stand in solidarity with those who are most vulnerable. May the events of that afternoon in Brookstone Estates inspire us all to look beyond our own fears, to listen to the voices of those who have been marginalized, and to work together to create a world where every call for help is met not with suspicion, but with compassion and understanding. In conclusion, as you reflect on this narrative, remember that the true measure of our society lies not in the perfection of our driveways or the impeccability of our lawns, but in the strength of our empathy and the depth of our commitment to justice for every member of our community. It is a story that demands we ask ourselves difficult questions and challenges us to build a future where no child, no matter how young, must ever feel like a suspect in their own neighborhood. This is the story of that afternoon, a moment suspended in time, a snapshot of a world where truth finally hit harder than the accusation. A story that must be remembered, shared, and learned from. And as the night falls and the stars appear above Brookstone Estates, let us all commit to a future where our communities are defined not by fear, but by trust, respect, and the unwavering belief that every human being deserves to be seen for who they truly are. In the quiet aftermath of that fateful afternoon, as dusk turned into night and the familiar hum of the neighborhood settled back in, a new understanding began to take root. The events that had unfolded were not just a series of isolated incidents, but rather a microcosm of a larger truth. A truth that calls us to reflect on the very foundations of our interactions with one another. Marcus's experience, marked by the heavy weight of unwarranted suspicion, and Rebecca's unwavering stand for justice, both serve as poignant reminders that our actions have the power to either divide or unite us. As the community slowly came to terms with what had happened, conversations began to ripple through Brookstone Estates and beyond. Neighbors started to question long-held beliefs and assumptions, exploring the ways in which fear and prejudice had infiltrated their lives. The incident sparked not only regret, but also a collective resolve, a determination to challenge the narratives that too often paint individuals solely by the color of their skin or by fleeting impressions. In sharing their stories, in listening to voices once silenced by the weight of bias, people discovered that real change begins with each of us. It begins with the courage to admit our errors, the humility to learn from them, and the strength to reach out with compassion. This conclusion is a call to all of us to look beyond surface judgments and to embrace the transformative power of empathy. It reminds us that while the scars of injustice may run deep, they can also pave the way for healing if we are willing to confront them openly. Every act of understanding, every moment spent questioning our own prejudices contributes to a mosaic of change, a change that has the potential to reshape not only our communities, but the very fabric of society itself. Let this story be a beacon, urging us to remember that every interaction is an opportunity to build bridges instead of walls, to replace suspicion with trust, and to transform fleeting moments of fear into lasting commitments to justice and equality. In the end, it is our shared humanity, the willingness to see each other as individuals with hopes, dreams, and inherent dignity, that holds the key to a future where everyone can walk home without fear, knowing that they are seen, heard, and valued for who they truly are.